The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, I'm Joni Siegel, the host of the Addiction Podcast. In 2022, over 100,000 people died from drug and alcohol abuse, and that number is growing daily. Fentanyl poisoning, pot, cocaine, heroin, and even psychedelics and alcohol all contribute to this crisis, while we're bombarded with promotions from thousands of rehabs. Newborns are born addicted, and the majority of homeless people struggle with drug addiction. Drug dealers exploit online resources to sell to teens, and antidepressant use is spiraling out of control. This podcast features brutally honest guest interviews revealing harsh realities and offering hope and solutions through their stories. We don't sugarcoat anything. Guests speak raw and real. More importantly, you'll find inspiration to understand, overcome, and achieve recovery, whether for yourself or to help others, some within your own family, many among your friends or associates. Whether you're seeking help or just a glimmer of hope, our podcast equips you with the latest insights to confront this generational battle. Many listeners tell us they want to join the fight, but do not have the time or money to act, lobby, or just help. If that's you, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and see how you can help. So, Nick Jonsson, we know that you have your own history with your addictions. Tell us, what was your rock bottom?
Well, I hit rock bottom in April 2018. At that time, I was lying in my bed, looking out, and what I could see was my big foot, swollen like an elephant foot. It was my left foot at that time. I was in full panic. I could hardly breathe, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why my foot was so swollen or what was happening. But what had happened leading up to that was that I had fallen down. And the last year I had had a drink basically every day to medicate myself just to get on with life. And the story of the swollen foot is something that I will share with you. What was that? Because it was later diagnosed by a psychiatrist to find out what the problem was with me.
Hi, my name is Amy Newman, and my husband Bobby and I have a business called Newman Intervention Services. We provide intervention services for families who have loved ones struggling with drug addiction. Our goal is to help individuals get the support and treatment they need to overcome addiction and start on the path to recovery. With our personalized and compassionate approach, we guide families through the challenging process of getting their loved one into rehab and onto a road of a healthier future. Together, we can make a positive difference in the lives of those affected by drugs. If you or someone you know is in need of an intervention, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Let's work together and bring hope and healing to those battling addiction.
Call 866-989-4499 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby. That's kind of scary, though. Okay. So tell us about your background. What led you into addiction and then ultimately got you out of it?
Yeah, I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I lived now 20 plus years in Southeast Asia where I've been working. And, growing up in Sweden in a working class family, alcohol was part of everyone's life. It was something that I associated with adulthood. It was just like getting a driving license, having a car. Well, around that age, I would be able to also drink alcohol. So it was something I was looking forward to, and it was sneaking in my life from time to time as a teenager. But it took off really when I moved to Australia. So moving from cold and dark Sweden to sunny, hot Australia, a lot of outdoors activities, being out, playing golf and so on. Beer seemed to be something that was going on all the time. I also studied at university, and with the campus and the bar and so on, the beer was cheap, maybe even subsidized the pricing. So we drank a lot, and I didn't think about it. But as it became more and more, and no parents around, being away from home, I didn't question myself. And before I knew it, though, I was drinking alcohol most of the days, and it started with beer, and later on also it would be harder stuff.
Interesting. And it's a story that we hear, though. I mean, partying happens in university. That's kind of how it goes. And then did you graduate?
Yes, I did. And I should say also that during my studies, I started as a very insecure Swede, English being my third language, with Swedish my first, German my second. Suddenly I was there trying to, understand. And it was a lot of pressures on. So it started to creep into me also that when I did the assignments and survey, and the work, and to deal with all that stress and pressure around studying, well, I'm here by myself. I can drink a beer to that. So if I'm looking back, that was perhaps some of the early warning signs. While it didn't give me any problems then, it sort of helped me. Alcohol also was a social lubricant for me at studying, and I brought that with me in the workplace. Later on, when I started working in Southeast Asia, I worked in advertising and marketing for some of the big American advertising agencies out there. And I remember my bosses cheering on me, going out doing as much business development I could. And I did really well going out there. It seemed like, the more I was consuming alcohol, the more I was at these events entertaining clients, the more business I got and the better I performed. So I could really start to get a sense that there was a link here. The more I drank, the better I performed. And that was something that I just kept doing for years.
And I wish I could tell you that I haven't heard something like that before, but it's, so often with people, if there's any sort of insecurity or any sort of introversion, I mean, alcohol is the best extroversion thing you can get. I mean, yeah, you can talk to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And just walking into a room full of strangers at the networking event, it was very uncomfortable for me, and it was something I would avoid doing. But hey, I found the answer. I can leave the office a little bit earlier. I can even tell my boss that I'm going because he knows I'm going to an event. Then I will sneak into a bar, sit and have a few drinks there, warm up a little bit, get myself comfortable, and then I could go to the event, and then I could get on with it. And as it happens, I typically picked all those chamber events as well, where they had the free flow deal. You paid at the entrance one ticket, and then you can drink as much as you like.
Mhm.
That worked well for me. And then after the event, typically, the party went on. There was always going to be a handful of people out of 500 or 1,000 in a networking evening who wanted to keep going. And I can remember being the last one leaving the event many times.
Wow. But it was good for business, apparently.
Yes, it was. And so much so that actually these days, though, I will share more on that later, that networking and relationships and events like this is basically what I do for a living. But at that time, I naturally was there because I really enjoyed the drinking and the partying of it. But I also set up a lot of business opportunities around that, connecting people and so on. So I sort of become an extrovert with alcohol, and I became the connector. I became the person who didn't mind going up in the spotlight and so on, which is not naturally otherwise the person I am.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. We appreciate you listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. We don't do this podcast because we are former addicts. We don't do this podcast because we have loved ones who have suffered from addiction. We do this podcast because we feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today, and that no matter who you are, no matter your religion, no matter your income status, no matter your race, no matter anything about you, addiction affects you. This podcast is a free resource for anybody looking for help with addiction. If you would like to contribute to our podcast,
go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and make a donation of whatever amount you would like. Thank you for supporting us.
Being an introvert and wanting deeper conversations, smaller conversations and smaller groups. But it worked at the time. And it worked until it didn't work anymore, because I was starting eventually to get some issues with alcohol in my life as well.
What were those issues?
Yeah, so the first time I can remember being hospitalized for over drinking, which is what I'm saying now looking back at it. I didn't realize at the time.
Of course
It
not.
was around 2005. So it's 20 years ago. And I remember it was a Monday morning, and I had to go to hospital. I had panic attacks. I struggled breathing. The doctors then said that I had, hypertension. I needed some medication and all of these kind of things. But looking back, it's clearly that I'd been over drinking that weekend, and I was very, very shaky and fragile.
Right. Did you move on to other drugs?
Not back then. That happened from 2015 when it's 10 years later, fast forward, after I've been working my career higher, bigger roles and so on, and really also starting to controlling the alcohol. So then years later, I realized that alcohol was sort of starting to be an issue in my life. I better control this. I used to start taking some blocks off. I started to exercise. I lost weight. I signed up for marathons and all this kind of stuff. And that's the time also when it became a bigger issue. And at that time, I was introduced to sometimes to take drugs to feel better in the mornings. And then also at that time, I went through divorce, and with that met another lady, and we had some fun with recreational drugs as well.
Which ones?
It was a lot of the cocaine is quite common in Asia, and it was also ecstasy. Those were the two leading ones, basically in Southeast Asia. So those two came into my life around 2015.
Okay. And bring us forward from there. What happened to your life from then on to now?
Yeah, so at 2015, when I was at the peak of my career, I naturally felt I deserved better. I really have achieved, the bonuses, the promotions and everything, and I thought I could do better. So with that, I resigned and wanted to look for an entrepreneurial career. But that also then left me to look at my relationship. I had been married for 13 years. We had a son together. And I also filed for a divorce from my relationship and thought that it was time to look for something better there as well. We had a son who was 5 years at the time. So that made me then out of job, without a relationship, by myself in Jakarta, Indonesia, a big city where I don't have many friends. And with that, then I lost all my healthy habits. I didn't realize it, but basically my gym membership was traded to a bar stool. And with that also, my healthy diet was traded for fast food and pizza. And I gained about 60 pounds rather quickly. And with that then came more and more problems. My health was deteriorating, and I was in full-blown denial, trying to show to the world that I had it all together. But I clearly didn't. That also put me in a depression. I had anxiety, panic attacks. And for the next 2-3 years, it was a downward spiral. It was a downward spiral where I jumped from job to job, failed everything I could. I burnt through all my savings and cash. I even cashed in my pension plan. I cashed in my son's university plan. And it was, while on the outside it looked like a 2.5-3 years party, at the inside it was 2-3 years of hell.
Ah, I understand. So what led to this, what you kind of started off, your rock bottom, or what we call the point of no return? What led to that? And how did you pull out of that?
Yeah, it was the loneliness and the isolation, and the fact that, I didn't speak about it. I was bottling it all up internally, doing everything I could to show to the world that I was fine and that everything was great and that I was working on a new project and this was going to be different. It's going to work out. Everything will be fine and so on. And I didn't speak to anyone honestly about what was happening. And that is what led me to that day when I was lying in the bed looking at that swollen foot. It was just that. It was me bottling everything up, holding all my feelings inside. And I had not been a good person at discussing my feelings before. Being an introvert and also in a family where we didn't discuss feelings was not something I learned. So when I was going through this crisis in my life and when addiction was taking the best of me, then I didn't have the tools to deal with it. My way was just shutting down until my body was collapsing on me. So that swollen foot was later diagnosed by a psychiatrist as a psychosomatic illness, basically a mental health illness of bottling everything up internally, not letting it out. So that was my rock bottom. And at that time, I wrote my will, my testament, and I prepared everything, acting like I was suicidal. And I didn't have suicidal thoughts, but I certainly thought that life was over, that I was going to die. I was certain I was going to die, so I prepared for that.
And you were still doing cocaine and ecstasy and alcohol, pretty much?
Not so much drugs at that time. It was more alcohol, and then it was like Valium and those kind of medications to calm myself. I was just trying to get by. It wasn't a party at this time. It was that party was over. Let's say it like that.
It was almost like drugs or alcohol and whatever medications for survival at that point, or so you believed.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you are, and you've got this huge swollen foot. What did you do?
I had at that time met a woman, let's call her perhaps a guardian angel, someone who is today my wife, second wife. And we had just gotten married at that time. So can you imagine on the outside of us doing well enough to get married to a lovely lady? And that also put that extra pressure on me that I better deliver here. And I just decided, and I thought that it was fair for me to share with her how I felt. And I remember clearly that day when I sat her down on the sofa and I basically spilled out my heart and just shared how I felt. I cried, I shared. She listened with empathy, thank God, and gave me that chance. And that was the biggest moment of my life. The first time I ever expressed myself honestly. I just couldn't take it anymore. It was like it exploded out of me. And with that, though, was the start of my comeback, just by sharing how I felt.
That, and that's huge, because the first thing that you have to do is admit that there's a problem and something that you need to handle. And I think for so many people, that's the hardest thing. Do you know? But once you do that, because once you do that, then you can start to heal. But until you're willing to admit that there's something that you have to heal from, you just keep going. What did you do then? How did you get clean? Did you just cold turkey? Did you go to any sort of rehab?
Yeah. So when I spoke up to her, we started to at least understand that we have to deal with this now. And at least now I didn't have to hide in the pain and hide in my bed. We were now two in this, which made it a little bit easier. She was willing to help me. And with that, the first thing we did was that she dragged me to a doctor pretty much right away without me even understanding what's happening, because I was quite in a shock of this day. But then at the doctor, I was quite quiet. I sat in the corner, but she then told what I've shared to the doctor. The doctor was listening with empathy. The doctor was able to give some medication, recommending us what else to do, and so on. Then after the doctor went to a friend who had been in recovery herself, someone with addiction challenges, who was sober and clean for a few years at this time. And again, she listened. And I remember clearly what she said when she looked at me, and she said, "Nick, you will be able to smile again," because she saw I look like a ghost. And that gave me some comfort. And I remember that.
Yeah.
So hearing this in one day, 3 meetings, 3 episodes, 3 sharings, and really it was like, something was lifted from me. They say that a problem shared is a problem halved. And I could literally feel that. I can understand that concept, that definition. I sort of defined that for myself that day. And with that, I was introduced to the world of the 12-step recovery programs, and that was the beginning of my recovery.
That's awesome. It's so fortunate that you had those people in your life that, were so positive about it. And, and we all need that no matter what we're going through, but especially when you want to become free from addiction, you have to have people that understand it and that are positive and that will stick with you. That's awesome. How did it go? How did your recovery go? Were there relapses? What was that like?
Yeah, it was not easy, but at that stage, at least the willingness was there, the little small support networks there. I was introduced to the 12-step program. I started to get some phone calls, SMSs with some, invited to a meeting, but the tug of war to make it there. I was still not sober. I started to control the drinking more a little bit and getting better. A plant was seeded that I'm coming into recovery. Then a few weeks later after that, I did go to my first 12-step recovery meeting for alcohol. And I was very nervous for this meeting, more nervous than I've ever been, even for those big networking events.
Well, you didn't have the alcohol to help you with that one, too.
I did have, so I was
You
still
did?
drinking
Okay.
a little bit
Okay.
at this time. And I remember it was a morning meeting in Singapore, 7:30 a.m. I brought a backpack with beer, and on I walked to the meeting. I showed up 6:30 a.m. or something, sitting around the corner, drinking beer by myself, coming in with a backpack to the meeting, and realizing, oh my God, no one is drinking here. So I put the backpack under the table, and there I was. So I made it to my first meeting, and then I walked out of there. I was introduced to someone who wanted to sponsor me. I said I will think about it, and then I walked away. I kept the phone number, and then I went on drinking a bit more and traveling with my wife for 2-3 weeks until I said, I'm ready now. I said, I'm ready now, let's talk. And that's what we're doing. We made the next game plan.
I got it. And then did you stop at that point, or?
So at that point, I said, I cannot stop by myself, but let's really try. And it was my birthday that next day. And I said, let's stop tomorrow. Please support me. Please help me. I will stop tomorrow. Let's celebrate my birthday with me stopping. And I said, let's go out for a few last drinks together. I want this to end, and I want to make sure that it's the last ones. So we went for a few drinks, not much, and went to bed in decent time. And I was committed to stop the next day. And I remember waking up and doing all I could, but I went into really bad shaking, and it was awful. And around lunchtime, I was so sick that I could hardly move. And I basically cried and begged her to go out and buy me some alcohol. She walked out and she bought me a 6-pack of beer and came back with that. I drank very quickly to recover. And I remember apologizing, crying, saying, I'm sorry, I cannot do it. I cannot stop. And then she comforted me. She listened, and then she said, we try tomorrow again. And that's tomorrow. We went to a hospital.
Okay.
That was the next. And from there on, I got a medical need, a detox, a cleanup that I needed. And as I walked out of there, I haven't had any drugs or alcohol.
That's awesome. I've had people on the podcast who have just, gone cold turkey off of heroin or off of, cocaine or what have you. But when you talk about alcohol or certain drugs like benzos, you can cold turkey. I know people who have done it, but it's very, very, very dangerous. And even some of the rehabs that we know very well, when someone comes in and they're addicted to either benzos or alcohol, they have to go and do a medical detox because of the nature of the drugs and the alcohol. It's who knew? I mean, people drink. It's legal. You can drink. But coming down off of alcohol, it can be deadly.
Yeah, and I could feel that. It was so scary, so scary. So despite having spoken up, despite having the support, despite having my wife by my side, she's being with me. Despite that, I just could not do it. I really, really needed that help from the doctor. And I remember also being very scared of going to the doctor because I was scared that they were going to inpatient me, lock me up, take me to rehab. I didn't have the funds at that time. I gone through the funds. I didn't want my new wife to know that I was broke, and I didn't want all these things. I didn't want to be locked up. And luckily, the doctor understood what was going on and helped us. And I basically was outpatient, coming in and out, getting the medications, the injections, and so on I needed for a few days. And that gave me then the support to get clean and sober. And then I walked into my AA meeting from there. And then after that, basically, I came back to those recovery meetings almost every day for many, many years. And that was really what made it.
Well, and you make a very good point, and we've said this so many times on the podcast, and I think people who have never experienced addiction don't necessarily understand it. But yes, at that point, you had the mental willingness to get clean and sober and the spiritual ability to get clean and sober. But these drugs are physically addicting. And so that's what I mean when I say you have to do a medical detox with alcohol, because alcohol is so physically addicting and physically debilitating. It's all well and good for you to go, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. But the body is, yeah, no, you are, because otherwise, we're going to get so sick that maybe you won't make it. So anyway, that's the point that I think people don't understand. They think, why doesn't that individual just stop? Because we're talking physical, we're talking mental, and we're talking spiritual addiction, and all three have to be addressed.
Absolutely. I didn't know that. I learned it
Yeah.
a painful way. So if
Yes.
there's anyone who's listening here, they're
Yeah.
having these thoughts, yeah, at least now you know. And
Yes.
it takes all those three.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us what you're doing now. You're helping other people, and we know that happens often when someone comes out of addiction. So tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, so for the first couple of years in recovery, I was getting all in. I was, as I said, at least 6 meetings a week. Most weeks was 7 meetings a week. I got into, running groups, helping, sponsoring, structuring, setting up, and also helped the groups we had in Singapore to survive through the pandemic, being very creative in what we could do, and really feeling a lot of meaning in that. But right from the start also, as I was clean and sober, all the things I failed in my life, I looked at them and how can I do similar with that? If I now failed at drinking and drugging, if I now failed the other businesses and personal relationships, how can I make everything right? And what about myself, my body? I start to look at it. So before, if I had been doing training for triathlons, Ironman events, and so on in isolation, doing it myself to best ability, I figured, what about if I'm also vulnerable and open with my triathlon journey and also go to a group who does triathlon? And what about if I go to a coach who knows what to do with triathlon and ask that person to coach me? So that's what I started to do. So I apply the same thinking in all areas of my life, just double down on everything. And that's what had kept me excited. And that had brought me and kept me now on this learning journey. I'm also certified as a sobriety coach. I'm also a life coach, executive coach. I'm running confidential peer groups for executives. And I'm also running a men's group, because not all men are addicts, but they also need a safe space to talk about their challenges. So that's in a nutshell what I'm doing. So coaching, speaking, mentoring, and doing a lot of support, and still foundational also in the world of recovery in the 12-step groups.
I think that's awesome. And the other thing that's an example of that, again, we've heard from other people in recovery, is that, is to approach your recovery the same way you approached your addiction. Do you know what I mean? It was a life habit to be addicted and to drink. And so now you've made it a life habit to be sober, and not only to be sober yourself, but to help others to be sober. So how can people get help from you? How can they do that?
Yeah, so I on an individual level, I support individuals, most men, but also women. I work with some women also, and I'm open to have a one-on-one call with anyone who I can be of service to. And what I always share with them after I listen, if someone has any drug or alcohol problems, well, there's two routes. There's the complementary route, and there I can guide you and help you as much as you want. And then I introduce them to the 12-step programs and all the beautiful work there. But if someone is not up for that, if someone is not ready for that, then they need guidance on the side, and they perhaps need you to look at their life purpose, the legacy in their life, and do some deep work on life coaching and so on the side. Then I can help them with that as well. But also I'm offering the groups, right? So the groups, because while the 12-step programs is wonderful and fantastic, not everyone is ready for that. And not everyone is ready to go in and say, I'm an alcoholic, for example. And maybe they aren't. Maybe they are in the gray zone. Maybe they are a gray zone drinker who is not yet addicted, but they realize it's a problem. They want to sort it out. I can help them. And just finally, also, of course, I have my book, best-selling book on executive loneliness. It's on Amazon.
What's it called?
Executive loneliness.
Oh.
Yes, here it is.
Executive loneliness.
Yes. So this book has my story of rock bottom and the story of others in there. And it's not specifically about addiction, but it's also about the loneliness in the workplace, the isolation and feelings that I had in my work, and how I use drugs and alcohol to be able to push through.
I think that's great. And once again, for those listening, it's available on Amazon. And Nick's website is his name, Nick Jonsson, JONSSON.com. And you can reach out to, they can reach out to you there, correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Nick, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for talking to us today. You know, you're doing good things and you're helping people. And I think that is going to contribute to your sobriety more than anything else.
Thank you so much, Joni. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening. Nick is all the way in Southeast Asia, so it was good that we could connect up time-wise. Good story. Once again, his book is called Executive Loneliness, and it is available on Amazon. It is by Nick Jonsson, JONSSON. I will put his website and a link to the book in the show notes. We'll be back with another interview.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.